Does the fear of looking foolish keep you from connecting with others? If so, you are definitely not alone. Workplace changes brought about by the pandemic in particular have left many of us feeling uncomfortable with how to build relationships in these virtual work environments. My guest this week, Rob Maloney, host of the Heart and Hard Work podcast, talks about his default assumption that other humans want to connect, so it's always worth the risk. We also talk about the growth mindset, curiosity, and how to support ourselves as compassionately as we support those around us. Thank you, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Rob. I'm so excited to continue our conversation. I know we spoke recently on your podcast, which we'll talk more about as we move forward, but I'd love to welcome you here today and invite you to introduce yourself.
Likewise, Kim, it's an absolute pleasure to continue this conversation. I also spoke with Kathleen Taylor, who recently talked with you, and then she was on my podcast too. So it's a pleasure to be here and to have a chance to continue this conversation.
I love how we're starting our own little community. It was so great to hear from Kathleen, and now she and I are going to be talking on my podcast. It's just wonderful how we're able to connect in this new world. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, the overlap of the mission is really special. So a little bit about me. I like to think of myself as voicing the growth mindset. And it's kind of what the persona has been throughout the podcast that I started, called Heart and Hard Work. I am someone who is not particularly talented in anything specifically. I never have seen myself as being extraordinary in any given capacity, except for hustle and hard work. And I've never been the biggest, the fastest, the strongest. And for all that translated from sports, that now has led me to just take on every opportunity that I can. And someone that I really strive to not take today for granted and believe that tomorrow's promised. So how can we do the most with our time today to make the most meaningful interactions and experiences with the people we love and care about?
And I would say that makes you extraordinary, right? Because not
perhaps, right?
That way.
I told a joke, jokingly one time, I was like, I've never been cool by any standard definition. I'm always just doing my own thing, but it's almost like you go so far in a full circle that you're not cool to the point that maybe that is what is cool after. I don't know. That's how I can justify it to myself.
Oh, I love that. And you talk about the growth mindset. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? How did you get to this place where you think about the world in this way? Because not everybody does. And I think sometimes those of us who live and breathe these concepts on a regular basis can often take them for granted. But I want to understand, have you always had this perspective? Was there a turning point? How did you get here?
Yeah, I think that to understand that, which is what I'm often trying to do, really understand not only my brain, but the human brain and how our experiences shape who we are, the way that we think, just being really meta-cognitive. And that's led to a lot of reflection. And I think it goes back to my experience as a really young child growing up, and everybody has traumas and hardships. And I think that just a lot of the pressures and things that you feel growing up, they led me to have a very fixed view of the world and kind of my place and the niche that you find from childhood. And it led me also to think about, just, am I always going to be stuck this way? I'm probably never going to be rich enough to be able to walk around the streets and give people money and quote unquote, make a difference by being super rich. And even the people that become super rich, it's often that's not what you spend your time doing anyway. You're always searching, you're always craving, you're always desiring more and more and more. But I don't know. I wanted to be able to make an impact and to do something meaningful for the people I love and care about on the way, and to be able to, kind of to really understand it quickly. It's like kind of be the change that you want to see in the world, like to embody that and really try to live every day and make a better life for myself than the one that I had growing up, and sort of honor the sacrifices of family members and people who love and cared and supported you and dealt with you when you were being a knucklehead kid and things like that. So to really find a way to make my own life better and the life better for the people around me, and to go back and forth by not thinking I'm going to make it big and then help people. I want to make it big because I helped people, and sort of master that skill and become so good at whatever I can do to help other people and make the people around me better, that in itself becomes a marketable skill.
Wow, that's so inspiring, because it's so easy to imagine that when you're a kid, you're not thinking about how do I make it rich so I can help people. Like you said, it's more so how can I make it rich so I can own multiple houses across the world, or so that, I can have more things. And so it's really inspiring to hear you talk about using your wealth in service of others.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, as a kid, I think I was often thinking about things that most kids probably aren't. I know there were several times when I like foregoed, I'm not sure what the past tense is, but foregoed my allowance so that my family could, get groceries. And I tell my dad, like, it's okay, you can pay me back in the future. And I think I had like a running tab at one point. It was like $5 a week. And I think it was up to like $380. And I was like, it's been a while since, but I was like, one day I'm going to get paid more. I didn't fully understand interest at that point. But yeah, I remember just thinking about a lot of things as a kid, and trying to like I never imagined being on a plane when I was a kid. I thought that was something only like millionaires could do. In fact, there were school field trips that I didn't even tell my parents about, because I was worried that where is that money going to come from? We needed that to be able to pay the rent. I was worried about getting kicked out of our house and then not being able to see my friends, and kind of like the pressure of every little mistake and how that might impact my family. I think that is something that became very instilled in me from a very young age, and where that might have been traumatic to me growing up, it shaped who I am. And now in reflection and kind of labeling it and facing it, I can use that as a superpower. It's truly created an empathy and an understanding of people's issues and people's traumas. I think that everybody's fighting a battle, and it's like it's whether there's no point in comparing it, because it's what it feels like to you, and to understand that what you're going through is hard to you has been really a foundational platform for my empathy and my compassion, and the way that I strive to build relationships and lead.
And I so appreciate your sharing that. And I would say there's some similarities to my story. I grew up with a single mom, and we had a lot of financial pressures, and you grow up a lot faster than other people around you. You don't have the luxury of just being carefree when you have to worry about money issues when you're young. But I really love how you talk about it as a path towards greater empathy. And I kind of see myself in that too. I think that the traumatic nature of it is obviously not, it's real, and it's not pleasant, but as cliche as it sounds, it does build character, right? Because you are able to put yourself in the shoes of other people around you. And I'm curious, like, how does that empathy play out today, now as an adult, right? Like, how do you see yourself in relationship to other people around you?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mean, growing up, it was like that pressure that you talk about, and then it creates the pressure. And I definitely felt that on more than one occasion. And then every time something challenging was going on, and I tried to just kind of push it away, push it down, and just continue to be upbeat, up and positive. It led me to just kind of this life is hard, like whatever, like no one cares about you, like figure it out, keep smiling, keep laughing, keep making everybody happy. And I think in the ever ongoing process of maturing, because I don't know, there's no such thing as maturity. It's just constantly learning from experiences, and years and years of getting in trouble for my impulsivity and the ADHD kind of popping out, and like, then I'd get myself in trouble, and then I'd be upset. So it's a cyclical loop. But what I've come to learn is that to make a distinction between traumas, there's big T traumas, little T traumas, and excuses. And that's not a distinction that I was cognizant of as a kid. That's not something that gets spoken about enough, especially with men, to be able to break that down. And I do that. I try to do that for myself, to be able to break down, is this a big T trauma? Is this a little T trauma? And is this an excuse? Most of the time, it probably is an excuse, but there are some things that you can classify it as objectively, like those are really hard things, and I should not be trying to push through them. I should not be trying to make it happen still. I should give myself time, give myself grace, have an understanding. And most of the reason I've been able to come to that reflection in myself is the amount of times I want to be there to support people around me. And when we hear the story in someone else and we're like, that's so, like, that's hard. Make sure you take the time that you need. But for myself, like, would I give myself that grace? Would I give myself that opportunity and that space to feel it? Or would I be like, no, I have to work harder, push through this, go to the gym, ignore it. Like, I'm fine. Keep smiling, keep being happy. Cause that was a dead end path.
You're making me think about some themes that have come up recently in my conversations on this show. And that is kind of where we get our personal power. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of times it seems binary, right? That there's the camp of people who live in a victim mentality and will always find excuses for why their lives are terrible and it's everyone else's fault, right? And then there are people who are really intentional about not pointing the finger and taking personal responsibility and not wanting to dwell too much, like you're saying, of you are not giving themselves the kind of grace that you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm really interested in what you're saying is that I think that you can there's space for both in a healthy way, because if you don't acknowledge the hardship, if you don't acknowledge the capital T trauma, the lowercase trauma, however you want to think about it, it not only makes it harder for you because you're not processing what's already there anyway, but to your point, it also makes it a lot harder to be the resource that you want to be to the people around you who also struggle.
Absolutely. And it would just be really hypocritical. Like, a small anecdote. I'm a learner of golf, and I often invite out many friends who've never played before, and especially my MBA program, to come out and learn. Men, women, international students who've never really had a chance, just to give them the exposure and just to know how much it means to be able to play with someone who's played before. And now I'm not particularly good, but I love coming out with the new players, because I'm able to impart some wisdom onto them and be able to part, like, hey, I know some tips and things that have helped me tremendously from the people who've helped me. Give these a shot. And then here I am telling them, like, don't, be easy on yourself. Like, don't take it too seriously, because it's a hard game. It's really challenging. And then I turn around and I make a mistake, classically, because I'm not a very good golfer. And I'm like, am I really about to get mad at myself when I'm here, like, telling them all, like, no, give yourself grace. Don't be mad at yourself. Like, it's just, like, just take the next swing and move on, and sort of have that resilience to not let every little bump in the road keep you down and drag you down. So that's just, like, a really tangible, like, wake up call to me. Like, stop telling people, don't give people advice if you're not willing to take it yourself. I can't be telling people, one thing I'm trying to not do as much is not give advice where it's not warranted. But when people are looking for advice, it's like, maybe I should listen to myself a little bit more.
That's a really good point. I'm curious, and I don't want to make you the spokesperson for all men here, but I am curious because stereotypically, men have a harder time with not feeling confident and strong, and it's not as socially acceptable for men to be vulnerable, right, and to talk about some of these things. And so I'm curious, how has it felt for you to navigate your world as a male? Do you feel different from your friends in terms of how you think about these things? Do they think you're crazy? Do they agree? Like, is there a generational component to this? I'm curious, like, how you feel in relationship to your peers.
Yeah, I also agree. I don't know if I can be a spokesperson for all men, but I hope, and nor a role model, but just to perspective on what's helped me. And I think, to come full circle, it's leaning into that growth mindset and realizing how powerful it is. I think I've spent so many of my younger years kind of in the fool role, especially in school growing up. I was class clown, always making jokes. I always wanted to make people happy, always wanted to be, and I thought that that was the best way to support people. And that was the best way that I could offer value everywhere I went. And that was part of my identity. And so I spent years getting more and more comfortable being silly and distinguishing people laughing at me and with me. And maybe there was plenty of times they were laughing at me too, but it didn't matter as long as people were enjoying themselves and having fun. I think that that unlocked for me a great ability to not care about looking like a fool. And more than ever, especially with the podcast and especially leaning into being willing to make mistakes and understand that I'm going to learn from these. Like I walked into my internship, I walked into my first day of work and I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm here. Don't worry. I'm going to make so many mistakes. I'm going to fail so fast, but I'm going to learn even faster. And like this like growth mindset, exponential growth of my ability to quickly, and that resiliency, emotional intelligence to quickly bounce back and say like, no, I'm learning from this. I'm moving on. Like I'm not going to make this mistake again, and I'm going to progress. And so it comes from that not being afraid to look like a fool, because I've had so much experience looking like a fool and then getting to the other side of it and realizing that the uncomfortability, and then we hear the cliches like be comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm like, well, I lived my whole life uncomfortable. It's like you almost forget what comfortable feels like for me. And so I don't think that that's the norm, but I would say it's helped me tremendously to be able to let go, to realize. And that a lot of times, we talk about men like challenges, and men like to solve problems and to build that growth mindset. I would say um, the biggest challenge for me was to also realize that not everyone needed just laugh and just joy and just positivity all the time. That for me, to get to the next level of what I wanted to do and my ability to support people around me and my ability to show up for the people I care about, was to actually look inward and do that deep reflective work and care more about being able to show up on a personal and intimate level and not just always be laughing, and to be able to have empathy and to be able to sit comfortably and just be what that person might need in the moment. I mean, one last analogy to solidify it. Have you ever seen the movie Inside Out?
Yeah. Mhm.
So I feel like that story, that was like a documentary about the inside of my brain. It was just like joy, wanting to solve everything and every little problem going on, but understanding like you really need to have a full grasp of emotional intelligence. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to be the person that I want to be. And so the harder thing for me, the challenge in itself, was to be actually more emotionally intelligent, to invest more in emotions besides just joy.
Mm. It's so uh, it's so fascinating to listen to you talk about this, because I just think that we're at a time when we really need more people to be thinking about themselves in these more holistic ways. And I think workplaces have historically made it feel unsafe to move beyond a very truncated range of
Right.
emotion. And those emotions might be different for men or for women, right? And so I wonder, you talk about the experience you've had throughout your life that has made you more comfortable in these uncomfortable situations. But when you're in the average workplace, do you question whether it's safe to express more than just joy? Like, do you feel like you have to adapt your style based on the workplace cultural norms? Do you see any
Yeah.
shifts there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I can't and I adapt it, but I'm also, so again, people think I'm a fool, especially when I walk into a room and a big smile, and like I want people to be uplifted and have, I often get told I have a lot of energy. I like to think I have enthusiasm, because enthusiasm is energy plus purpose. Because energy is not contagious, but enthusiasm is, because if people can understand there's a purpose, then they can get behind it. But energy by itself is just like, it's 7:30 in the morning. Like, shut up. And so like that doesn't spread. And in fact, that's just like, shut up. And so I really try to be intentional and have that intentionality. And a lot of that requires knowing when and where. I think that's also core to comedy. Like comedy is all about timing. And so building relationships, comedy is really important. I don't feel like all emotions are welcomed, mostly because they haven't been. I mean, you can just test that by asking someone, how are you? And, you're never going to get like the real answer. It's just that feeler. It's the throwaway question, but it's like, are we safe to have a conversation right now? And then there's only like two responses, like, I'm good, or like, work, it's just like, what? So a big premise of my podcast is like, how do we ask better questions? And often we get so hung up on like, am I going to ask the wrong question and this and that? Like, there's some safe questions that you can ask. And then would you rather kind of things, like a lot of times I throw out the silly questions, like in our hot seat, like, would you rather have sweet potatoes or regular potatoes? Or, would you rather have crunchy tacos or soft tacos? And at first people are like, what? But then, oh, well, like 99% of the time after it leads them to say something after. It just opens up an invitation to say it's the process of building trust, a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of even just a teaser of a question, like, like I like crunchy tacos. But the thing about my dad, he always used to, and it's like, now we're building a relationship. And so that's why I love to, and I'm constantly thinking about how to ask better questions.
So tell us more about the podcast, because I want to hear how, obviously I had the privilege of being able to be a guest on your podcast, but how did you get there? What made you decide I want to take this to a podcast forum?
For sure. I think, and it was an absolute pleasure. We had such a great conversation. It just was years and years of bottled up experiences and just thinking like, I want someone to talk about this more. And on a daily basis, just people don't have time and don't sit. I have some really fantastic conversations with people all over the world. At this point, I've been to over 45 countries. I lived in China for 2.5 years before COVID. And then I got to do some more traveling and reuniting with friends all over the world. And that is not because I'm rich. That's not because I'm famous, clearly. It's because of a really big focus on building relationships and putting people first. And so I wanted to find a way to continue conversations like that beyond fixed constructs, beyond just like needing to be one-on-one, and to try to make those conversations available to people everywhere. Because it's not even that people don't have access to people that they can talk to, mentorship, resources, networking, but they also don't even know how. Like this is 12 plus years of trying to self-development to try to work on myself and work out the voice of my inner critic, as well as how I can be helpful to my dad and my mom, who various different health conditions throughout my life growing up. Like, how can I be more supportive and be an asset everywhere I go, and just learning how I can augment myself to be a multiplier leader and walk into a room and make everyone else around me better. And that's what the goal has been now. And to be able to share these conversations is really like, the premise is, how much can a 30-minute conversation change your life, your actions, your mindset? To be able to do this on a podcast and share conversations that you can access anytime, anywhere in the world. And you can learn from it, emulate it, find the other people. We created the LinkedIn community page where people can go to it to continue the conversation, find more people that want to think like you and want to share those conversations with you. Because it's like you said, I don't think everyone thinks the same way that we do. And it's unfortunate. I don't think it's because they don't want to. I think it's because they don't know how. And so rather than spending my whole life thinking like, I wish things were different, I was like, let's get this started. And so the podcast itself was intended to be a metaphor, being that it was going to progress, it was going to change, and it was going to be about people who are progressing and who are changing. It was originally called Witness Evolution. And the premise was you get to witness the behind the scenes, the process, people reflecting, people talking about their challenges and how they're persevering through them, and what it's like to learn how to become a leader and learn from mistakes and just get better and better. And you can see, if we ever go to the podcast, people always like to go to the first episode, and the first episode is called Just Get Started, Go. And it's like awesome to think about the progress, because we've come so far from then. But like, I wish people would also like go to the most recent episode, because it's so much better. And no knock against where we were. It's just where we were years ago. There was lack of preparation. My ability as a host was limited. I didn't know how to transition from thought to thought. And it wasn't as smooth, but it was great. And I think it really still was good content. So I'm really proud to be a year later still working on this passion project and involving people and getting to have conversations with amazing leaders like yourself.
I love that. It's so much. It's very much in the vein of be the change you want to see, right? Because I think that's That's very similar to why I started this podcast too, is
Right.
I want to have the conversations I want to have, and I want to have them in a way that other people can access because they may not know how to have the conversation as well. And I wonder, because you have so much positive energy and you have such a service mindset. And on the one hand, I think that can be a real confidence booster, because I truly believe that our greatest confidence comes from feeling like we are using our strengths in service of something ourselves. On the other hand, it can feel like a lot of responsibility too. And I wonder if you feel pressure sometimes. Like, how do you handle your own self-doubt?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think what you're talking about is like alignment, and really like you have, and that's it more so than ever, especially in the past 3 months. I've really felt a strong sense of alignment because what I'm doing is so core to what I've wanted to do, and to be able to articulate and express feelings that I've had different parts of the brain. There's whole more podcasts to come for that, but to be able to actually express what you're feeling, it takes different parts of the brain and different levels of emotional intelligence. So to be able to be having the conversations, and it adds a lot of pressure because you have that great sense of responsibility, knowing that there's more that you can do, but trying to find solace in also like, well, I don't know if I'll ever make it so big that I can just give away money or make a change. And really, quote unquote, people think about impact and changing the world like in one fell swoop. I don't know if I'll ever make it there, but if tomorrow's not promised, I want every day along the way to be that most impactful that I can make it. And so I can try to go to bed at night and sleep well at night. And I think that also, I can't say like I sleep well all the time because I'm often thinking like, damn, there's more I could have done. I got to do this. I got to tie up that. I got to send that email. And it's like, yeah, there's definitely that level of thought and pressure. It just constantly circulates. So for me, I think every day I wake up is like a new chance to start fresh and like, all right, let's go get more today. And it's the relationships and the interactions that I have with people that really keep me grounded. And that's, I think, why I love having the conversation and getting to celebrate and highlight other people, because it really makes me feel like I've done good, and I've used my time, I've used my energy, and I've used my ability well.
I have a question for you now that you're saying that, because I think I'm going back to what you were saying before about how there are a lot of people who just don't know how to have these conversations. And I think it's a really important point. And I think now that we are in this new world that continues to change, but is this hybrid or virtual type of work format has brought with it many benefits. But for people who have historically struggled with the connection to other people, I think this has created an even greater obstacle. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on like, what's step one for people who are listening to us and thinking, oh gosh, I want more of that personal connection. I really want to feel like I can have these conversations, but I don't even know where to begin. Is there a starting point that you would recommend?
I think the starting point would be the micro reflection to realize to yourself, like, wow, other people have this same feeling as me of wanting to connect. And I think that where for myself too, that was a massive realization, like in college, like when you walk into the lunchroom or in like, who do I sit with? No one. And like, and I was like, you know what? In general, people usually want to connect. And I would say 9 times out of 10, people are willing to connect, and they're not sure how or when. So they just kind of, they fall down, like they fall into line, or more or less like because of uncertainty, and they don't want to break from that. They don't want to risk looking like a fool for that 5% of the time. And like I said, at this point, if you want to think I'm a fool, I have enough schooling and education and master's degrees to say like, I don't care what you think. You're just projecting something of your own. But to think like other people want to connect, and it just takes someone who's willing to start that connection, someone who's willing to ask a question, someone who's willing to say, hey, how are you? And say like, hey, oh, I noticed you have an emblem, whatever it might be. Oh, that's a cool university. Like, I'm a fan of as well. Like, people want to connect, and it's just a matter of, is someone going to be willing to ask one little question to get started? It doesn't have to be perfect, but it usually leads to the better question and the better connections.
That is so well said, because that is exactly how I feel too, that if you err on the side of believing that people want to connect, the vast majority of the time, you're going to have a positive experience. And
Right.
in that very small percentage of the time where maybe somebody doesn't respond the way you want them to, to your point, that tells you far more about them than it does about yourself. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong or that you need to feel guilt or shame. It just means that maybe that person hasn't, gotten themselves together yet to be capable of that kind
or
of
that they're having a tough day.
Yes.
It's just like that probably is more often that, because I'll like have those bad interactions, and this is like the full disclosure part. Like that does happen, right? The 1 out of 10 times, or the 1 out of 20 times, and you're like, wow, I feel like the biggest idiot in the world, and I hate myself, and I'm gonna go sit in the corner quietly. I'm actually not even gonna eat my food anymore. I'm just actually gonna leave. I'm going home. It's like you feel terrible, but it's just so not permanent until walking to the next person, and then you start having a conversation, and then whoever it might be. So, it's just like we can learn. I think it was from How to Win Friends and Influence People. And just like we can learn so much about connecting with people from the greatest connectors in the world, dogs. Just when they come into the room, they're just smiling, they're happy, they're just glad to be around you. And if you can radiate that kind of personality with the people, if you're just happy to be around the people that you're with, and you can learn from them and look at those as opportunities and really not take them for granted, just being around people and celebrating that, whether it's just asking a simple question. To me, that's like, we have so much to learn from dogs. Plus I love dogs.
I do too. So I guess I'm thinking about, because you've said so many really powerful things. What's the biggest thing you hope people take away from this conversation?
I would say the biggest thing I hope people take away from this conversation is probably don't be afraid to look like a fool, because people are going to make, like, there's so many different cliches, but people are going to make their assumptions and their judgments about you no matter what. Stay focused. I think we love Brene Brown. I think both of us, and stay focused on caring about what the right people think, and take solace in that, because it's so easy to get caught up in the opinions of everybody else and just nonsense and crap. But the more that you can stay focused on surrounding yourself with the right people, the people whose opinions you care about, and the people who uplift you continuously, right? Putting yourself in the right environment. Stay focused on what they think. Don't take advice of like, don't care what anyone thinks, because it's incomplete. Just don't care about what people whose opinions don't matter think, and stay close to the people who really do see you the way that you want to be seen, and witness the best qualities in you, and who can bring them out of you.
I think that's incredibly wise advice. So where can people find you, Rob, if they want to hear the podcast or learn more about you?
For sure. The podcast is on Spotify, Apple, all the major platforms. And if you want to stay plugged into the community, you can go to LinkedIn, Heart and Hard Work Podcast. And it's like linkedin.com/company/heart-hard-work. And we would love to be able to continue the conversations, and just to have people feel included and get to reflect and share those reflections for reflecting and strengthening. If anyone wants to be on the podcast as well and has an interesting mindset perspective that they'd love to share, we're very open to that as well.
That's wonderful. So I'll link to all of that in the show notes as well, so that anybody who's looking can find you easily. And I'm going to join that LinkedIn group right after we're done here.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. So there's already been a lot of buzz about your episode. So we're glad to have hosted you. And now it's a pleasure to close this chapter as well, being a guest on your podcast. You do an amazing job, and I know the thoughts and the mindsets of what goes into hosting. So it's cool to be on the other side and get a chance to do a lot more of the expression part. And I'm just grateful, really, really grateful to have had the opportunity, Kim.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. It was truly my pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.